It is now my honor to introduce the Douglas G. Altman Lecture. It's a privilege to introduce Dr. Malcolm McLeod. He is presenting online virtually. He's a professor of neurology and translational neurosciences and co-director of the Edinburgh Neuroscience at the University of Edinburgh. He co-founded the Collaborative Approach to Meta-Analysis and Review of Animal Data from Experimental Studies program. That's also called the Comrades program. And with people in this room, has written about biomedical research, increasing value and reducing waste. He's a meta-researcher and has been at the forefront of the application of evidence synthesis tools and as applied to preclinical research. He's giving this talk in honor of Doug Altman, a statistician who may be well known to some of you in this room and was well known for his work on statistical methodology and improving the reliability and reporting of research, having done a lot of his work with our colleagues at the British Medical Journal. Professor Altman was a major contributor to the Peer Review Congress. The lecture is named in his honor. He was an amazing human being, and we still miss him. And with that, I will pass the microphone over to Dr. McLeod. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words of introduction. And I would start by echoing everything you've said about Doug Altman, a giant, and has done a huge amount for the field. Now, I can't see my slides. Can someone tell me if you could, because I can't see them, I can't advance them, I can't. Are they on your screen? Because they ain't on mine.
Yeah, we're not showing them yet on this end, but we'll check with our support.
I can try sharing them from here if that might be easier.
Yes, I think there's a large screen, so if you can share them into your Zoom screen, everyone will be able to see.
How does that do?
That we can see them if you can just do the slideshow, enlarge them.
Oh, right.
So okay, you're good. You're good.
Excellent, excellent. Right, thank you very much, and apologies for that. It is a pleasure to give the Douglas Altman Memorial Lecture. Does the journal article have a future? And so, I've got to start off with some disclosures and disclaimers. Firstly, I've made several funding applications in this space with varying degrees of success. So I have an interest, if you like, in exaggerating the scale of any shortcomings which are present. The views expressed are my own, and they shouldn't be taken in any way as having the support of any organization with which I'm associated. And finally, I've got, as I've said, huge amount of admiration for Doug Altman, but I make no claim that he would agree or endorse with anything that I'm about to say. I hope he would find it interesting, and I hope you will find it interesting and challenging and stimulating. And again, to start off with, it takes a village to create a research opus or a corpus, and over the years I've had the privilege of working with many, many great people, old and young, from right around the world. And if you like any of this, it's to their credit rather than to mine. By way of a preamble, usually at this stage, the plenary lecturer says, I'm really sorry that I'm not able to be with you in Chicago this morning, but I'm deliberately not with you in Chicago this morning for two reasons. The first is that earlier this year, my wife and I had a fantastic holiday, which, as you can see, was in the Republic of Cuba. And we left Cuba on the 12th of January, which was the day that the American president's travel ban on Cuba came into place. And we didn't really know this was coming. It meant that I could travel to be with you today if I applied for a visa, but the first visa application interview in the London embassy was in 2 weeks from now. So I'm beginning to know what it feels like to belong to a minority group who have trouble getting visas to travel to international conferences, and then reading in the press about people who tried. So someone suggested me that perhaps the Cuban borders police and the American borders police didn't share their records, and I should maybe just wing it and try and get in anyway. But I thought the prospects of ending up in a nice detention center were too high, particularly as I hope to be running the Berlin Marathon in 2 weeks' time, of which more later. And then the second reason is by way of a small protest on my part about what's happened to and what's happening to scientists and researchers in America, with the full-scale rounding up and detention in a very arbitrary way of tens of hundreds of thousands of particularly early career researchers from overseas on the flimsiest of pretexts. Partly disappointed in that, and partly disappointed in the responses of some of your academic institutions, find ways in which they can cozy up the administration and reach a bargain with the administration. Now, of course, what Americans decide to do is a matter for the American public and the American electorate, but actions have consequences, and one consequence is that, and it's a trivial consequence, but one consequence is that I'm here and not with you in the US. So moving on to other problems and the substance of my talk, I think the main issue, the main problem that I find that imperils the future of the journal article is what I call larceny capitalism, the denuding of public assets to augment private or corporate wealth. And you could argue that many of our governments, our previous government in the UK was great at this. Many of our governments are good at this, but I think our publishers are also good at this. The figures that it's possible to extract for the profits of our major publishing houses are eye-watering. But of course, if they're providing a service which is of value and represents good value for money, then that's not a problem. I believe in people's right to make money if they're doing a good job. If we think about what's happening though, researchers plan their research and then they seek funding for that research, either from government agencies or from philanthropic organizations or from hybrids. They conduct the research, write it up, and then they submit it for consideration for publication. It undergoes peer review, it's then published, and then it's read by other researchers who then use it to plan the research that they're going to do. And so the research cycle keeps on rolling, keeps on spinning. And we've got researchers at the heart of all this driving it forward, funded, as I say, by taxpayers and philanthropics. And at each of these stages, asset passes from the researcher to the publishing house. So many publishers require that the intellectual property rights, the copyright of submitted materials is transferred to them. Peer review is conducted by which I mean the researcher community, for the journals at usually zero cost. Publishing involves a cost charged to the researcher by the publisher. And then the same or different researchers have to pay the publisher, either through their institution or individually, to be able to read the work that the researchers have done. So at each of these stages highlighted, publishing houses are extracting capital from the system. And the question is where they add value. And is the value that they add sufficiently high? And if not, is that might be what is imperiling their future. So thinking about the value that might be added, could be in dissemination, allowing a researcher to reach their desired audience, or it could be that publication in a journal, any journal, or in particular journals, might be taken as an indicator of quality, of usefulness, of the provenance of the research. Is this research worth reading? And previously, at least, is this researcher any good? If they've published in Nature or Science or Cell, they must be brilliant. Thankfully, DORA is starting to undermine that particular use of the publication process. But let's think about reaching your desired audience, and is this worth reading? So Moody and Walsh, this is over 20 years ago now, Moody and Walsh articulated 7 laws on the value of information as an economic good. Information is infinitely shareable. I can share my preprints with anyone. The value of information increases with its use rather than being depleted by use. Information is perishable. The older it is, the less useful it is. The value of information increases with accuracy, pretty self-evident, and the value of information increases when it's combined with other pieces of information. More information is not necessarily better, and information is not depletable. It's not like coal. My using information doesn't stop someone else from using the same information. And I think it's worth those in publishing reflecting on those 7 values of information and how much their processes add to or detract from that value, and how much they try and acquire that value and hold it and sell it on. So for instance, the value of information increasing when combined with other information. I recently been involved with the Wellcome Trust in the Evidence Synthesis Infrastructure Collaborative, which is seeking to create a framework to help the automation of evidence synthesis, particularly in pursuit of the Global Sustainable Development Goals. And that work is made 10 times more difficult when leading publishers like Elsevier and Springer Nature remove tens of thousands of abstracts from OpenAlex that would allow systematic reviewers to work out whether the work was relevant or not. So taking away value from the publication, not adding to. And here's a bit about the delay in dissemination. So this is a series of requests for animal experiments sent to our animal house in Edinburgh 10 years ago. And what we've done is for each of those animal experiments, we've logged how long it took to get submitted for publication in the journal of final publication, accepted for publication, and actually published. And you see here a series of Kaplan-Meier survival curves. And what I would draw your attention to is the median delay between submission and publication of 235 days. So it's 235 days between me sending in my manuscript to the journal in which it's eventually published and it becoming available for other researchers to use. Now, we know about depreciation and value of time. And in fact, I looked for depreciation rate of intellectual value of manuscript. And in fact, the New Zealand Tax Office publishes a depreciation rate of how much manuscripts lose value every year, and they estimate it at 20%. So my delay to publication here of 235 days, we can think that if we submitted it to archives, it would be 2 days. So we've got 233 days, which is because of the publishing model that we use. So research loses 12% of its value just for that reason. Is the work worth reading? Is it completely fabricated? Some sessions yesterday on paper mill products and how we might avoid them. Probably more of a problem for journal articles than for preprint servers. Are bits of this work fabricated? Is there image reuse or misuse or misattribution or mislabeling? Is there data fabrication or data substitution? Is relevant research not presented because of publication bias or selective outcome reporting bias or selective exclusion of individual data points? And does the research design support the conclusion? Because if the publishing model did all of these things, then it would add value and we would say, well, maybe it's not such a bad deal. So this is work with Emily Stena, looking at animal stroke studies and finding evidence of a publication bias. We analyzed data for almost 1,400 publications, imputed about 200 missing publications with true efficacy in these studies falling from 30% to 24%. With John's group, we looked at excess significant bias within studies, suggestive of a selective outcome reporting bias across all neurological disorders in animal models, a conservative estimate of 1/6, 16% of outcomes not reported, but an upper estimate of almost half of them not reported. And in Alzheimer's disease research, it's even worse, a third of outcomes not reported at a conservative estimate, with an upper estimate of 80% of studies not reported. Well, is risk of bias reporting important? Well, here's our very early work looking at animal studies for a neuroprotective drug called NXY059. And we looked at the reporting of randomization and of blinding during the experiment and of blinding of the assessment of outcome. And across 11 publications, there was a substantial and significantly smaller efficacy in those studies which reported these measures to reduce the risk of bias. And that, along with several other pieces of work by ourselves and others, led to a meeting in DC in 2012, which involved Veronique Kiermer, brought it all together, and Story Landis's paper in Nature, saying that the 4 things that we really wanted to see in an animal study to be able to judge whether the findings were correct or not. I mean, this isn't luxury. This is, what do I really need to know whether it's true or not? Whether or not they randomized allocation to group, blinding, whether they reported inclusion criteria and exclusions from the analysis, and a power calculation. And so we then went to look at the output from 5 leading UK institutions, color-coded here to protect my future career aspirations, but a lovely blue Scottish color there in the middle, and said what proportion of their research outputs reported these things. And you can see that for randomization, it was less than 20%. For blinding, it was 20% on a good day. Inclusion, exclusion, 10%. Power calculations, 1 in 52%. 68% of these 1,000 studies from leading UK institutions did not report a single one of these things. And only 1 out of 1,173 reported all of these things. And these are articles that have been through peer review, which we are told increases the reliability of the findings. Well, it doesn't increase the provenance of the reliability enough for me to believe it without doing my own due diligence, in which case what value has been added through that whole process. We know that 12% of the value has been taken away just from the time it was sitting in peer review. What value has been added? None. And we've looked at the reporting of these items going forward in the time since this analysis. And while there has been a small increase, it is in single-digit percentage increases over a 10-year period or so. I wanted just briefly to touch on where we as a research community also were getting things wrong. I've been accused recently, and I think rightly, of admiring problems. I spent a lot of time going around saying, we looked at this field of research and it's rubbish. And then we looked at another field of research and it's also rubbish. And here's another problem here. So admiring problems is great, but it doesn't actually change anything. Looking at the oral presentations at this conference, 31 out of 51 describe a problem, only describe a problem. Only 11 of them evaluate possible solutions, of which only 4 are randomized. On the upside of those 4 randomized studies, 2, well done, Gowrie, well done, Nick, 2 are definitely using pre-registration because I found the pre-registrations, which is good, and 50% is better than most other domains. But 2, we don't know whether they were pre-registered or not. So we could do better. And too much, I think, of our meta-research is of low quality. We use convenience samples, non-randomized studies. It's interesting, but it doesn't generate information which is robust enough to drive or to inform changes in practice at publishers or at academic institutions or wherever. So we need the same kind of level of evidence that you would need for a clinical trial to be able to drive changes in practice. And simply sampling from the top 6 medical journals and making the, I think in some ways, quite arrogant assumption that if they're bad, everyone else must be worse, is a bit dismissive of a lot of the good work that's been done in other different medical journals to try and improve quality. So what might be done rather than just admiring the problem? Well, I think there are some things which really must be done if the journal article is to have a future and isn't going to be overwhelmed by people saying, well, the archives do just as good a job. So firstly, require that all research has an institutional sponsor to act as a guarantor that the work was done as described. And if that institutional sponsor doesn't engage with publisher concerns, remove their rights of sponsorship so that every researcher from the University of Edinburgh would be barred from submitting to that journal until such time as satisfaction was obtained. Require all research to be supported by an a priori publicly available study protocol, because otherwise we don't know that people have been driven by their data and the conclusions they draw. And that protocol could be closed until the time of publication to protect their intellectual property, but it must be supported by a protocol. Journals should conduct in-house expert-led statistical and methodological review, and they should set aside appropriate resource for this. Often working with journals, we're told that, in fact, some evidence from the study we did with Nature on the implementation of their checklist for animal studies, we're told that, well, we could do this, but it's very, very expensive. Well, it's not as expensive as not having journal articles anymore, and I think more of that should be done. And finally, please, with my evidence synthesis hat on, facilitate rather than obstruct evidence synthesis. There's no reason why I should have to search 5 different databases and then deduplicate everything to try and work out what evidence is out there when OpenAlex provides a tool and a vehicle, OpenAlex and others, through which I would be able to identify this stuff. And that approach is actively obstructed by journals and by publishers. Finally, I want to tell you a little bit about a replication project that I'm currently involved with. This is my Alzheimer's research replication project. The original finding was MacLeod running the London Marathon in 2001 in a time of 3 hours, 38 minutes and 50 seconds. And the replication will be in Berlin in 2 weeks' time. My replication criteria, my conceptual replication is finishing the course before the van comes around to pick up the stragglers. Direct replication allows me to lose 30 seconds per year from my original time, call it 3 hours 51. And replication with extension would actually be going a little bit faster. And I think, having just had my 60th birthday, that's unlikely, but possible. If you would like to support these efforts, you can support me here. My target fundraising, which I have not yet reached, is about the same as the article processing charge that Alzheimer's Research UK would pay for one published research article as it saw its way through to publication. Thank you very much for your time. Happy to take any questions.
The floor is open for questions. Anything to ask? Dr. McLeod, thanks for that amazing presentation. People are lining up first here. A man in white.
Johnny Anidis from Stanford. Malcolm, thank you for a very, very stimulating talk, to say the least. I'm just wondering whether the actions that you propose have any randomized trials to support them, any of them. I don't know of any, to be honest. And I do fear that some of them may even have collateral damages if implemented. For example, protocol for everything being done. I think most research is exploratory, and the problem that we have is that people do not acknowledge that it is exploratory. If they did, I think we would know. This is what we did. We just went into the jungle, and there was no protocol. I think that would be good to know. Or institutions. Institutions have very limited both knowledge and manpower in terms of kind of really looking over your shoulder on everything that is being done as it is being done. Where are we going to find the experts and the methodologies to be involved in all the studies? I wish we had them, but that would require entirely changing the scientific workforce to make 50% of the workforce being methodologists. You know, that I would love that, but I want to be realistic. And, you know, systematic reviews, yesterday we had presentations saying that 90% of systematic reviews were DES rejected because they were horrible. So how much evidence is there for these proposals?
Thanks, John. Let me take it in turns. First of all, there's not very much evidence, and that's because funders and journals haven't been spending these big profits that I showed you about earlier on the kind of research and development that would allow them to be better, because it would be fairly straightforward to do RCTs. We've done some RCTs, for instance, with PLOS ONE on whether requiring authors to complete a checklist does any good. Short answer is it doesn't. It's pretty, you know, one could imagine an RCT to test these being reasonably straightforward to do. You know, we can do RCTs of much more complicated things in healthcare. But someone needs to pony up the money to do it. And it's the lack of money and lack of enthusiasm which speaks to me. Second thing about exploratory research versus hypothesis testing, I completely agree. The fetish with dressing up everything as hypothesis testing is crazy. And maybe I should just say then instead that journals should require a protocol for every work in which a p-value is presented. Because p-values are presented in all of these works, and p-values are hypothesis testing statistics. And while people might say, well, this is really exploratory, if it really is exploratory, then it shouldn't have any p-values in it. So take away the p-values or require a protocol, one of the two. And again, there's some work in Europe through the iRise project that's testing some of these. And finally, you're concerned that institutions don't have enough knowledge to police what happens inside them. Well, I agree that that's a problem, but there's an implication in your question, or there's a consequence of your question, which is that we're quite happy in our journals to accept research from institutions which we don't believe have the capacity of ensuring that the research they do is good. And I think publishers need to do a bit of standard raising, and institutions being what they are, they will find a way to increase their institutional standards to be able to deliver it. I know these are kind of harsh and quite apocalyptic proposals, but you know, from what I've described earlier on, I do not see a way in which I could hand on heart saying getting myself published in a journal gives me any more value than putting my work on bioRxiv and walking away from it. And until you fix that.
Thank you. We have at least two more questions. Dr. Shah, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Nihar Shah from the Machine Learning and Computer Science departments at Carnegie Mellon University.
Oh, hi.
And it's wonderful you brought up the point about for-profit publications and publishing. So just for some context in my field, which is machine learning and AI, like 25 years ago, we decided to boycott for-profit publishers. And everything since then is owned by the community. The money stays in research, and our journals are free to submit, free to publish, free to download. So with that context, my question is like, what is it about your fields that the culture is still such that it uses for-profit publishing so much, and which siphons off so much money from our research and universities to make profits for the investors?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's habit, it's culture, it's out of date attachment to wouldn't it be great if I had a Nature paper? Wouldn't it be great if I? It's a way in which this is used. The journal of publication in our fields is used as a heuristic for the quality of the researcher. And it's even with Dora, it's taking us a long time to wean people from that. Part of my day job is evaluating the research submissions that are going to be submitted by my institution to our forthcoming UK research evaluation exercise. And even those of us who completely believe in all this stuff, we think, well, our Nature papers will be all right because they'll like them, even if we know that it's not important. I'm not sure, and it would be a really interesting observational study, John, with so to keep you happy, would be whether requests for peer review were more likely to be answered in non-for-profit, because that's my expectation, that I'm more likely to review for those not-for-profit publishers in my space than I am for for-profit publication.
Wonderful. We may have time for one more quick question and answer, please.
Sure. Hi, my name is Gary McDowell. I'm based with my own company here, Light Dollar, in Chicago. My question is, you alluded to the political situation here in the US, and I would say it's not favorable to the journal article right now. Specifically, the National Institutes of Health has a request for information on prohibition of federal funds for publication charges. My question is, do you think we are sort of, the time has passed for the journal article? Is it too late already given that political pressure, or are there still things that can be done?
Oh, well, thank you very much for the invitation to comment on American politics. I'm really torn. What's happening at the NIH seems to me, and there's a maxim for this. I can't remember the maxim, but it's something like dancing to the devil while playing God's tunes. You know, all this attempt to lever all the things that we know to be wrong with the research effort in a way of actually securing greater central control over what's happening is I think very disappointing. In relation, I think it relates to the previous question. I think we should be trying to let 1,000 flowers bloom and having diversity in what's happening. And I would agree with if the view of NIH or my institution or whomever is they're spending a huge amount of their money on the cost of publication and they're not sure what value they're getting for it. I would agree with that. I don't think it's too late, and I've not said much about PLOS because I'm conflicted because I think they're great, but I think there are people like PLOS in this space who are showing us that there is a different future for publishing that may well ride to the rescue.
Thank you. We need to wrap up and move to the next session. Please join me in thanking the amazing Dr. McLeod.
Thanks very much, everyone.